All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Shivers. Today we have our guest, which is Philip Hernandez, owner creator of the Haunt Network. So, Philip, I will hand it over to you to just kind of tell us a little bit about what you do, how you got started, all of that fun stuff.
Yeah, so right now I operate the Haunted Attraction Network, which is kind of like the I, the leading news source for the haunted attraction industry. So we really think of us as more like we're trying to take local news, but we're doing it if the local community were like the haunt industry, instead of like your local community. So we do try and cover all of the range of topics. So yeah, we do go out and we do a lot of videos. We do videos, both horizontal, landscape and vertical, long form and short form. We also do a weekly newsletter. We do a weekly podcast as well. We have actually two podcasts, one a long form podcast and one short form podcast. So we try and do all the different mediums, and that way that hunters can get the information wherever whatever they find best. Because a lot of hunters like to listen to stuff, and some people like to read. Depends on how busy they are with their work or whatnot. But yeah, during the off season, I think we cover all the off season stuff, which would be the convention news and trade show circuit and big developments in business or what's going on with vendors, new things that they're releasing, deals, that kind of stuff. And then during the show season, we usually go around and I try and find interesting stories that houses are doing. So, somebody who's doing like last year, one of my favorite stories was from Scarehouse Windsor, where they were doing like a full three-course dining experience that was like before the haunt, but it like expanded stories of the haunt. And it had special effects in it, and they had like a seance room where you would eat in the seance and then the seance chamber would activate. So there's, there's cool things that people are doing all over the world. And since the haunters are busy running their haunts, they can't go out and see them. And I think during the season we provide that, and then we switch back into off season after Christmas, and we start getting ready for the Oscars awards, which is the awards we produce with the Haunted Attraction Association. And so, yeah, it's like a justice cycle, and we go back and forth, and we do all the content and look at all that kind of stuff. So that's what we do at the network, and we, kind of make all that different content year round, of course. And then for me, I got into the haunted house and haunted industry space because I used to be a home haunter when I was young, and then up through like college and made like a big home haunt, and then eventually we went commercial, and it I made like a screen park, but then I stopped doing it because it was way too much and I couldn't deal with it. And I kind of was like, I don't know what I'm doing, and nobody I'm working with knows what they're doing, and this is crazy. So I had been studying media since I was in middle school, doing a radio production and videography and journalism. And so it kind of was like, oh, like I know how to do this thing, and I also like love this space, and I don't want to run a haunt myself because it's terrible, but I do like to create content. So those two things kind of just merged. And now that kind of what I think of is I'm like, this is what I would like to have when I were like young, where, to hear the classes and the education. Because like the irony is like now I know everything. It's like now if I could like go back in time, I'd be like, oh, we can't use black plastic, everything has to be treated, and we actually should make the diagram out first. And if we can't use a CAD software, then we should just draw it with graph paper, and we should actually make a plan, and we should, try and make curve outs and distractions and train the actors this way. So it's yeah, the irony is not lost on me, but yeah. So I've been doing the media brand since 2014 is when we started doing the podcast and doing those sections. But obviously before that, I was doing a haunter, and so I've been in the haunted attraction space for over 20 years in that realm. So not very long, considering that when we give our lifetime achievement awards, most of those people have been working professionally for 45 years or plus. So it does kind of feel like I'm just starting, but then sometimes I look around and I'm like, oh, I actually it's like you lose track. It thinks you get into the cycle, and then it just like goes and goes, and you're like, oh my gosh.
That's so cool. Yeah. So, I mean, by going to all these vendor shows and especially places like Trans World, seeing all of these changes year after year after year, is it kind of crazy for you from that perspective of just like all of these changes, all of these updates, or is it kind of exciting to see like what's new?
Yeah, everything changes, but nothing changes at all. So, it's one of those things where I've interviewed people about this topic, also about like changes and trends and all that, people that have been going for decades. And now I kind of agree with them in that really nothing changes. It's very rare to see something that's going to fundamentally change the concept of a haunted house because haunted houses are theater that you walk through. And haunted houses, in their nature, are about the interaction between the story and the audience and the guests and whatnot. And so it's very rare that you're going to see something at a show that's going to change the business model of a haunt, right? So most of the time, then you see things that are like categorical categories. So like this year, they had the xenomorph thing, from Distortions, which was my favorite thing. But ultimately, it's a prop. It's a animatronic that goes in there and it does its thing on a trigger and whatnot. So like in that realm, it's not going to change your business model. You're not going to stop having live actors because you have this guy in your haunt, or you're not going to turn your haunt into a museum instead because now you have this guy. So now people can just pay in to come and watch him. Like that's probably not going to be what you're going to do. So, and the same is true then with all those things. The new mask from Immortal Mask that has the LCD monitor where the eyes are, and so like when you're looking at the character, it's like you can put media on there, like that's cool, but it's still a mask, like so it's one of those things where like you do each year there are things that we cover and the show also votes on best product and best booth and those items, but they're not categorical changes for the most part. I'd see you only really see like categorical changes maybe once every 5 years or once a decade that changes stuff. So the show doesn't change very much. It's still the black sea of haunters where they're all just black t-shirts and wearing their like haunt colors and all that. And you're still seeing, the haunt actors and everybody at the costume ball is always going all out. I mean, those things that are fundamental nature never change, but like every booth will have something new each year, but it's usually just like a derivative of a thing.
Fair, totally fair. So, are there things that you see like at these shows and I mean, even at haunts themselves that you just kind of think are like, that's totally unnecessary?
Frequently, but I think that's also kind of the nature of the game. Like you don't get into haunted houses if you want to make money. It's a terrible business. Most of them do not make money. And so the reason that you do it is part entertainment and part artistry. So like haunted attractions are an art. I would consider them a piece of art because you are trying to tell a story and a narrative and you're trying to entertain guests. Most haunters are not like obsessed with Halloween. They're not like weird Satanists or those type of things, which is a big misconception. They are people that enjoy entertaining people, and the way they enjoy entertaining people is usually one of two categories. Either they like to build a mousetrap or they like to be the person at the front, entertaining. So they're either like an actor or a builder are their main focus. And so, it I think because of those, yeah, I just yeah, I don't think you get into haunts to be, for it to be a good business. You get into it because you're trying to achieve one of those items. And because of that, though, you do, like because it's for art's sake and for entertainment, I think a lot of times there are things in there that are not necessarily strictly necessary, right? That's just the nature of the game. But also it's kind of like up to I mean, anytime you like watch a movie, right? Like I just saw Snow White, and there's some pieces in it where I'm like, was that really necessary, or could we have taken more time to build a better character, or to flesh out this thing or whatever? But a lot of people would say, well, of course it is because it's Snow White, and we got to stay true. But other people are like, could have used that film time in a better way. Like, so I think, I mean, yes, like I always go through and I'm like, the animatronic isn't even working, or it's not plugged in, or it's in a place where it's if it's like if you're in a room and you're trying to set up a distraction or whatnot, like your distraction should be your major prop because it's a thing that looks good, it's a thing that has money, it has all that stuff. But sometimes I go into a room and they'll be like a distraction, then also another prop on the side, and you're like, why is that other prop over there? Like no one's looking at that, and like you just it's the wrong way place for a distraction. You just it should be all focused here or whatnot, but it's because it's art.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm also curious about your opinion from like all of these people who have these years and years of haunt experience, yourself included. How does almost that industry of its own compare to something like a Halloween Horror Nights, where it's this very like high budget, but not necessarily focus on Halloween?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure how to answer that question. I think that in our industry, we consider Halloween Horror Nights to be part of the haunted attraction industry. We just consider it like a different, almost, I don't want to say like mode, but like a different. So, like, for example, the most recent Oscars award ceremony, we gave the board of directors for the association gave a special recognition award to TJ Manarino, who is one of the major creators behind Halloween Horror Nights. And he talked about his journey and creating Halloween Horror Nights during his acceptance speech, and he talked about the link, between what we all do in the room and that. And I think there is a strong link. I think that even we describe it as like an ecosystem, and even home haunters are part of that ecosystem because, the more excited that people get about Halloween, and then the more that you can kind of convince them to go to a haunted house, the better for all of us. And I think if you think about it, it's like you just break down the market. Like not every, people in terms of like if you look at America, right? Okay, so whatever 330 million or whatnot, but like not everybody even celebrates Halloween, so you're already taking that chunk in half, maybe or 50, 60%. And then of that, maybe 20, 25% even like consider going to a haunted house for Halloween, and so it's all about growing that amount of percentage. And so in that way, we are an ecosystem. So like home haunters help because they get their local communities, their neighbors excited about Halloween. And if they build something immersive, it gets people to start to think, oh, it could be cool to go look at this stuff, but in a more professional setting. And Halloween Horror Nights helps the independent attractions as long as they're not in like the most immediate region. So like people that like don't like live in like Orlando, but like outside of that, they do help because as a brand, they raise awareness of this as a thing that you could go do. And so it's all part of an ecosystem. So where I would say that they differ is, and I talked about this in the article that I wrote for Attractions Magazine about the year-round horror experience that they're trying to test out in Vegas. But essentially, it's like where they differ is basically their infrastructure. So Halloween Horror Nights does have a theme park that they get to use effectively, and so because of that, because of the branding and because of the marketing and because of the infrastructure, they're able to actually make a lot of money because they have the infrastructure in place and you can just sell into that infrastructure, versus independent attractions or even temporary attractions where you have to set up the entire infrastructure. Like look at the LA Haunted Hayride. They have less than 2 weeks to set up their entire attraction, in the middle of an active park that where there is sometimes mudslides or there are people doing like picnics. I mean, you're trying to set up an entire attraction and the queue lines and the shops and everything. And so I think we think of it more as that is the main difference is like we think of them as part of the industry, but we also put them in like a different level because of their ability to draw on existing infrastructure, which allows them to then generate more profit.
Love it. So
I
sort
don't
of
know if that answered your questions, but that's what I'm going with.
Yeah, yeah, no, it absolutely does. I love that idea of sort of bringing awareness for people who aren't just natural haunt fans too. But yeah, I mean, speaking of their whole Las Vegas upcoming stuff, do you think for the other types of haunted attractions that we're leaning more towards this almost year-round cycle of haunted houses?
I don't at all. Actually, in the article, I don't want to say critical, but I'm of two minds. Like one mind is that I really want it to succeed because I love haunted houses. And I'm like, please stay in business long enough for me to get to Vegas. That's all I ask you. That's what I'm thinking over here as a horror fan. But objectively speaking, year-round haunted houses are very hard to pull off and have never worked in Vegas before. And they have been tried before in that market, and they have not worked. Um, we do have year-round haunted attractions. A lot of people don't know this, but there are plenty around the US. We keep lists of them. The one I always go to is Mortem Manor in Kissimmee, which is like in Kissimmee's in the Orlando region. I mean, so it's right down the street from Universal. I mean, there's a year-round haunted house that's open there, and it's really good. So these things like do exist, right? And I think, um, as I said in my article, there's nothing that they have shared so far that makes me believe that what they're building is any different than just a regular screen park,
Mhm.
which is great for me because I love screen parks. But in terms of the business model, I'm like not convinced, that it's really going to be that successful when everyone else has tried it before and they're not doing anything different. So if everyone else has tried it before and you're not doing anything different, so like somebody explain to me how it's going to work, and they haven't clearly. But um, I think to what you said, like maybe like the last question. I maybe really didn't answer that part of your last question, but I think Halloween and horror are very different in America.
Mhm.
So you don't, in my book about the history of Halloween in Hong Kong, we talk about how like it's different in Hong Kong and how like Halloween is different there, but like you like in America, I think Americans think of Halloween and horror as different. And horror is something that's year round, and Halloween is not. And if a haunted house, in America is really by Americans perceived as a Halloween activity. And so the challenge here is how do we in a mass market, how do we take that and we make it a horror activity and therefore it can be year round? I think that's maybe like what you're kind of asking in both questions is like, what about this year round horror trend? Like, horror as a genre is becoming more popular. There's no doubt about that. It's you look at the Comic Cons, you look at the conventions, cosplayers, genres, even in anime. There's more horror. I mean, there's like horror everywhere. It's growing in popularity as a genre, but the link has yet to be established between like horror and a haunted house. And what really smart people have done, like Jason Egan in Vegas, because he didn't think that year-round horror would work when he did his research in that market. What he did was he got a license with it, and he created, the only escape room for it, chapter one and two. But let me describe this escape room, and you tell me if it's an escape room. So there's two different escape rooms, okay? Chapter one, chapter two, okay? Chapter one is over 16 rooms. It has live actors and it takes 90 minutes to get through. And each room has props and effects, actors, and puzzles. And so you work through the story of it as you go through. There's a full-size to scale Neibolt house, all that. Does that sound like an escape room or does that sound like a haunted house?
Yeah, an interactive haunted house.
Right? Like, so what he did was he took his background in building haunted houses and he just labeled it escape room so that it would so that the regular people, the muggles as we call them, would be like, "Oh yes, I like horror. I like it. I like escape rooms. I'll go to this." And then he's like, "Don't tell them it's a haunted house." Like that's kind of what he did to get around it, and he made it really low throughput by labeling it an escape room and by making it timed blocks and groups. That way the actors can serve everybody and it's a great experience and all that. And all those things is what Universal is saying they're going to do, but they're insisting on calling it a haunted house. And I'm
Mhm.
like, it's not going to work, guys. But so I think the appetite for horror is there. I just think it's a branding issue for the most part. It's like, how do you, and also it has to be divorced from it. Like there are some things like it is perfect because it did, people Stephen King, year round, like it is great. People love it. It was so popular. That whole concept, that's great. But he just opened the John Wick experience, like literally like next to where Universal is putting in the same guy, like opened the John Wick experience like next door to where Universal is going to be opening their thing. I mean, this guy is brilliant, just he's trying to get around them. And his play now is like, let's do like horror action because they're doing horror Halloween. I'm gonna do horror action and it's a great compliment. And I think that's more the thing is figuring out how to have that branding issue where you're like, okay, year-round horror is a thing, but how do we make experiences, that people feel like they can do year-round, and they don't feel like they can do haunted houses year-round in their traditional sense. So how do we adjust them? It's just like I reported a story on a man in Texas who built his haunt like it's a new haunt, and he built it from the beginning to transition between an escape room and a haunted house, which is a different build. Logistically, it's different. He had obviously there's different doors and there's passageways and all that are all different, but he literally designed it from the beginning to be able to change between a traditional haunt, and an escape room, and so he transitions them back and forth, and then he like rebrands them. So it's like a whole different. He just like it's like you're like it's like another person, a client that I have that runs Hush Haunted Attraction in Detroit. Like he has a haunted house during the haunt season, and during the off season, it's an immersive bar, and the bar just happens to be like it's like he just switches them during the haunt season. You come in the front of the building and you go through the haunt, and then during the bar season, you like walk through the bar, which is like the opposite end of the place, but it's like functioning bar and it's just immersive. So I mean, I think that's more. There are people trying to do this where they're trying to thread these needles, and I think those have been the successful models that have like kind of like gotten away from calling it a haunted house and just like do a different thing with it.
Yeah. No, that's so cool. I mean, you even think about like the Las Vegas landscape. You still have like Meow Wolf there too, of that gigantic, amazing escape room,
Yep.
but all with that underlying theme of almost like the backrooms vibe. So
Yep.
even though it's this like beautiful thing, it's still sort of scary. So it's like all these secret things that get to keep all of this moving and going.
Yep.
So kind of back to what you were saying before too about like the storyline aspect of it. From my aspect from Shivers, we do a lot of like murder mystery parties and very heavy on like the storytelling. I'm seeing a lot of haunted attractions where it's almost like you are part of that story, along with sort of what you're saying about that like immersive dinner experience. So when people are almost creating these new escape rooms and things like that, do you think it's more important to have that infrastructure or to have that story?
I think it's important to understand your audience first. Like, I guess I'm of two minds of this. Earlier, I talked a lot about how haunts are arts and all that kind of stuff, and I do believe that. Me though, having like failed so many times with my haunt and different things and all that, like I always try and be like, I know it's a work of art, but if you want to make money, and you want to treat it like a business, and you need to treat it like a business first. And it can be an art business, and that's okay. You can still tell your story, but like if you want to make money on it and you're serious about this, you need to start first from it being a business and make a business plan and think about it as a business. And as hard as it is, like kind of like kill your darlings, like Stephen King says, like sometimes the idea is it's like not, you may love it, but like the audience doesn't love it. It's not going to work. And so if you're asking me that question, and usually I would be like, are you going to try and make this a business, or are you going to try and do the thing you want to do? Like which one is it? And if you want to do it as a business, I would say you need to understand your local market first, and you need to understand that. And that will tell you, when you make your business plan, look at your local market, look at your competitors, look at your product differentiation, do your SWOT analysis, do your economic impact analysis, do all that. And then you figure out, okay, um, what what does my audience want, and what are other people doing, and is there a need enough, and do we satisfy the need with this product? And you might find that because there are no escape rooms at all in your area that do anything, or there's no immersive dinner parties, or there's no anything of that, that they don't really care about the story as much, or because you see this with markets that are, I don't want to say more or less evolved, but that's kind of what it is in terms of immersive exposure. Like um, this is a wild, crazy example, but like when I was in Saudi last month doing work there, it's like they have year-round haunted houses at Boulevard World in Saudi Arabia. They're not year-round. They're open when Boulevard World is open, which is like 6 months out of the year, but it's not during Halloween season. And their haunts are like terrible, but everyone loves them because they don't know any better. And I think that's, you see those type of things, right? It's like, not every market has a Disneyland to compare things to, right? And so I think that's part of it. And so when you're when your listeners, or when you're like sitting down and looking at that, a lot of it is your audience. Like, is your audience going to care enough? Do they care enough about it? Do they want those things? Are they going to get invested, or do they want like the quick thrills type of thing? And that's going to be enough for them. And because I think you definitely can take it too far. I mean, look at Galactic Star Cruiser, right? I mean, like, you can take it too far, or like, Evermore. I mean, there's so many examples of places that, went too far on the immersion, and it wasn't there wasn't they segmented their audience too much by who would want to do that amount of work. Because the old model was we talk at you
Mhm.
and you sit there and you enjoy it, right? We perform for you. And this part now is that like you have a role in the story to play. But some people don't want to do that because they're tired.
Yeah,
And so it's for your local market. It's like finding the balance. Is there enough of those people that want that extra, or is it better just do like a mystery dinner where it's a little bit, but most of it's entertainment, and they're just having fun and getting drunk and, whatever. Like, I mean, that's yeah. I would say it's like think about the people who like to get together, and when they get together, they play like board games versus the people that get together and just watch Netflix and chill or like just drink.
100%.
Like there are a lot more people that get together and just drink and are just like lazy than there are people who get together and have board game nights. And that's all I would tell you.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, I'm originally from northeastern Pennsylvania, and so like having
There's
all of
a lot
those
of stuff
haunts
around
that are
there.
there of like Reaper's Revenge and even Penhurst, Eastern State,
Hmm.
like you have amazing things like that. And so now I live in
Yeah, you're
Raleigh.
surrounded by that stuff up there. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And now I live in Raleigh and North Carolina. And so I helped out with one of the local haunts down here that was just so bad. And they were
Yep.
like, we can't do any pentagrams, no fire, no hell.
Yep.
That's all of the devil. And so my initial
Yeah, your
reaction.
local market, yeah, it's a lot different, in Raleigh because it's a
Mhm.
lot. It's definitely the local market. Their appetite for that is different. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And but exactly what you were just saying of I expected to kind of come down here and be like, oh, there's nobody here who's doing it. Like that, what a great way to start. But really it's nobody's doing it because nobody wants it.
Correct.
So yeah,
Correct.
it's interesting to think of it that way for sure.
Yeah, yeah. I think you see that. Like, I think people are surprised, maybe a little bit, because I think people always think it's like the big cities, but in haunted houses, it's actually not. I mean, like LA actually, I would argue, has less of, haunts and any of this stuff. They might have more like immersive entertainment. Like I was literally just invited to something that's similar. It's like a interactive dark seance, thing that I was just invited to the media preview for. So we have a lot more stuff like that, but places like you're describing, like the Pennsylvania, Ohio region, all that, like they have the most haunts, like by far, because again for business reasons, because the land is cheaper, generally the labor is cheaper. It's cheaper to pay an actor in that area than it is in like LA. It's like I mean it's cheaper in regions where it's cheaper to have infrastructure, to own your own building, the land, those kind of things. You're going to find more haunted houses, and like just like you're saying, yeah, like the density of it, it also trains the audience because like when you were in Pennsylvania, there was just more people that would go to haunts because there's more haunts, and they together they create a bigger market, and then within that market you can segment it out. But when you are now, it's like part of your job is even growing the market, like convincing people, like you know, convincing them like, oh, this is a thing you could do. You could have a corporate party. You could do this. It's a lot of that because I've never thought of it. I bet you find people who have like, I'd never thought of doing this, and you're just like rolling your eye.
Yeah, I mean, especially like my corporate background is in HR. So like
Yep.
I've always tried to tap into all these places to do like murder mysteries or even like boxed escape rooms, that
Yep.
type of thing. And yeah, it's exactly what you're saying. It's I never would have even thought about that. Like
Yep.
that's fun, that's creepy, but yeah, maybe not for us. So
Correct.
yeah,
Yep.
it's very interesting to kind of see it in that light for sure.
Yeah, it's a branding issue again, like we were saying, and then like you're saying too, it's like, I'm sure you talk to those people all the time, and they're just thinking in their head like, oh, I don't want to do that with my team or my team. We always do our parties, but we just, like bring in a pizza or we bring in a cake or, like they always do that version of the like hanging out with friends and drinking. They never do like the board game. And, that's by the culture too. I mean, like you have to want to play you know what I mean? Like you have to like want to actually hang out, with your coworkers or to be vulnerable with them in that way. And I think that's a big part of it. It's like we talk like in Margie Kerr in her book, Dr. Margie Kerr talked a lot about this in Fear, and we've seen a lot of the like people who study immersion. Effectively what it is. We don't ever say this, in this way, but what it is it's vulnerability. Like if I'm giving you a part to play in a production or in a story, that means that you could fail at that. I mean, like even if you can actually fail, like as a script writer, you've written the failure out of it or whatever. But it's perceived that if you perform, if we're asking you to perform, you might not perform well. And if your group is not used to that type of thing, that's where you get the problem because then you get like people who are like they don't want to perform their role because they're worried of the judgment with their group. And so I think that's probably a lot of also what you encountered in trying to sell this to corporate people because then they're thinking, well, like I don't want to perform in front of my coworkers and then them judge me or I'm vulnerable, I'm demonstrating vulnerability, and what if they don't reciprocate or what if they don't acknowledge that? When the reality is us as like designers of these experiences, we're we're trying to encourage that. We're also trying to make it so that it's impossible for you to like kind of, be fail out of that or not perform well or whatever. You're trying to design that out of it. But even the concept of it, I think is scary for people, and that's really what it is. I don't think they would ever be able to vocalize it, but like on our end, we, from studying it, we know that's what it is. That's the difference between being talked at and being part of the show is the level of vulnerability.
Mhm. I love that. Thank you for that perspective for sure. Just out of pure curiosity, I think a lot of people have that exposure to horror and even just Halloween in general as like kids. What is your opinion on having more like a younger crowd involved in the haunt experience?
Be careful is my opinion. Um, this is a very complicated and tough topic, so I'm gonna try and skirt roughly around it. But staffing, we conducted the first ever benchmark research study for haunted houses in 2022 in conjunction with the Haunted Attraction Association, and we do it every few years. So we're not gonna do it again until this year, or maybe next year, because I'm really behind in life. But that aside, there each year we do there are some like pulse checks in the industry, and so we did the big benchmark stuff, and then since then there's been like pulse checks, like how are you doing, but expose. The one of the number one concerns that has been happening since we did our benchmark study was staffing for haunted houses. They're always worried about staffing, which just makes sense. All that makes sense because staffing your haunt is difficult because acting in a haunt is hard work and a lot of people are not used to it, and for all the things we've discussed. Uh, so an answer that has been coming up more and more has been expanding to allow younger people to work in the haunt. And some states allow this and some states do not. You have to check with your local employment law. But even more states are opening up the ability for 16-year-olds to work in amusement centers and to work in plus stuff like haunted houses and with more regulations. But it is yeah. I mean, I would check with the association. They actually have a whole module for online sexual harassment training for minors and working with minors and how to navigate all that because it's such a big topic. But like, I would say like from when it comes to like on the staff end, just like be careful and try and get the training and be aware and kind of create the systems for it. As sure with your HR background, I don't need to tell you like it's like it creates there's some things. If you mean attendees for the haunt stuff, like I think that I think in America, again back to the branding thing, I don't think you're going to convince Americans that like trick or treating is for adults. I don't think we're going to get there in like for a while. There are some places where they have like trick or treating events for adults, that you get to trick or treat, like Mickey's Not So Scary Halloween Party and the Spooky Swap Meet here in LA. We have a few things where adults are encouraged to trick or treat, but regular neighborhoods, I don't think you're going to see it. Again, not the case in other countries because Halloween means different things in other countries. And so even American Halloween in other places, it's, adults are expected to trick or treat. So it's way different. But I don't see that really changing. So I do think that you're going to, in terms of the trick or treating, those aspects are going to continue to be, child centric. I think the staffing, haunts are by their necessity trying looking to bring in younger people, and that's challenging. Um, I think that you also see the challenge for younger guests going to haunted houses because there was a whole a few years back, like I guess every year it's a challenge because parents treat haunted houses like daycares. And so more and more haunted houses are adopting chaperone policies for attendees. And so even last year, it was a little weird because last year, like, for example, there were some theme parks that, that like they had a chaperone policy, but then they were hiring like 16-year-olds. And so you had this weird thing where you're like, technically speaking, like the 16-year-old who's like character is not allowed to be in the park right now because he doesn't have a chaperone. I mean, like it was this weird like zone of conflicting things. But I think you're going to see more and more of that because um, reports have been coming in from haunts all over, the country about like rowdy teenagers, basically, because the parents just drop a whole group of kids off, and then, they start fights or they just get rowdy or there's, whatever. They're just kids being kids. But at a haunt, when they're encouraged again, it's like haunts are really safe, and a lot of them that follow the chaos programs are safer than a lot of other places, honestly. But the perception, because that's how Honda is it's not safe, and so you get the kids and like they have this perception, so they come in, they want to be rowdy, and then security has to deal with them, and like it's a whole thing. So like I don't know, I think that's also difficult because I think more and more you're seeing haunts that are like don't bring. If you're bringing a minor or you're bringing a child, then you have to be with them at all times, and you can't just like drop them off with their friends or whatnot. But that's been a problem over the years.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of that brewery mentality. Like, I'm here to drink beer and have a good time, not
Yep.
listen to your baby.
Yep.
But yeah,
Yeah. 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 That's I think becoming increasingly an issue. Especially an issue because I understand all perspectives, right? But it's hard to navigate because a lot of the parents then are like, well, we have to bring our child because we can't afford a babysitter, and it's like, well, that's a valid reason. But then also, is your child going to be okay with the themes and with the startling or with the excitement, or especially if the child has, um, you know, sensitivity, and they have to be wearing headphones when they're going through. I mean, there's a lot of like, and then how are you going to monitor them? But yeah, I think the problem for the haunts has been when parents bring their kids and the kids don't want to go in, so they leave them there, then they cause problems where they're unattended, or, when they just drop their kids off because they don't want to go themselves or they don't want to, supervise them or whatever or any of that. Or, when they take the kids through and the kids are having panic attacks or they're sensitive to certain things or, they have epilepsy and they brought them in anyway or any of those. I think those are more the concerns. But then on the staffing side, it's also like, how do you work with younger folks and then have them being like a same scene with someone who's a lot older. So
absolutely. Yeah. So after seeing all of these different haunts, all around the world, what would you say from an opinion perspective is your absolute chef's kiss? Like this is a perfect haunt in your opinion.
I think that's another question I'm not really going to answer because
Mhm.
I can't. But I I usually tell people that the no two scares are the same. What scares one person will not scare another person, and it goes back to what we talked about with local markets. Like what locally and then also individually what that thing. So I think because this is an art form, in a way, it's a business, but it's also an art. And I think because of that, people have different preferences. That's like saying like, is the Mona Lisa really your favorite artwork, or is it just the thing that everyone says? And so you're like, oh, the mystique, right? So I think each person has preferences, and I would also drop them into buckets because it has to be like what's right for the situation. So like, um, I think my personal preference is generally the ones that are on the East Coast, because I enjoy more of the detailed sets and those kind of elements to it. I think Penhurst set is great. The ones that you mentioned, they're all great haunts. But then I talk to the people. I live in SoCal in Los Angeles, and so everyone's always like, "That's ridiculous. Our haunts are the best." And you're like, "Well, like, I'm not saying these are bad, but you just like it's about what's right for the environment." So like, LA Haunted Hayride is great for like something you have to set up in a park. Where you get in LA. Right. I mean, in the Pennsylvania area, I think Field of Screams is probably my favorite in the Pennsylvania region. But they just have woods to go into. You know what I mean? Like they just have it, right?
Yeah.
Trying to recreate that in LA, it's like, oh my God. But they do a good job for it. And I think this is what I mean, where you have to consider like the local circumstances of the situation before you're like, that's why it's so hard, because it's not like everything is equal. And even the guests coming in, their experiences are not equal. So there's plenty of people that go to LA Haunted Hayride that have never been to the East Coast and have never even like been on a real hayride. And so they think that's a real hayride, which is great. I mean, that's great. But like I think people who use their assets the best would be uh like the Queen Mary, the new Queen Mary, in Long Beach, they have an excellent event that is much more entertainment for families than it is scary, but they have scary elements, and it's a great balance. I think Field of Screams is excellent. It's an incredible show. I think like Hell's Gate is also an incredible show. I think Netherworld. I think Dark Hour. All these haunts that have won the Legacy Awards, honestly, from the association, I think are generally you can't really go wrong if you're into that kind of stuff. And I even enjoy the experiences where, like the Dining in Fear I mentioned at Scare House Windsor, or those places who are like doing innovative things. I find those interesting. Yeah.
Awesome. Super cool. So just one more question about the actual haunts themselves. From the paranormal aspect, mentioning Queen Mary, do you think that that helps, hinders, plays a part of it?
It definitely helps. I think that we always try and emphasize, at the network, what I cover is we do not cover anything paranormal. So like I do not cover paranormal at all. That's a hard line in our editorial focus. And we get pitched paranormal stuff all the time, like talk about this seance or talk about this thing we're doing or that whatever. And we don't. For us, it has to have an element of theatricality to it, and it has to be like an event that you can go to that has a theatrical element for us really to consider covering it. Um, that being said, like I don't know too, like I deliberately like don't cover like the paranormal for paranormal sake audience. However, I know that is generally bigger than the people that go to haunted houses, is the people that want to, go to haunted places tours or go, do ghost hunting stuff. That's a huge market. And I think that the haunts that are in places that do have a history, or they can bring in ghost hunters, and validate the haunt, all that only helps them because it doesn't deter anyone that wants to go to a haunt. All it does is attract people from another market and convince them to come to the haunt. And all it does is also give them additional opportunities. Like I believe Penhurst does ghost hunting as well, and Eastern State does a whole ghost hunting tour. The Queen Mary has a whole programming that's just about seances and ghost hunting that has nothing to do with the haunt stuff. They're able to run those things. So in those respects, all it does is help the haunt because it gives them more options and it attracts a bigger audience. Um, Logistically, I do know because I worked very closely with a lot of the folks on the Queen Mary. It can get challenging sometimes just because generally these places are older infrastructure, and so the infrastructure is older. But then also there's a need to preserve that historic nature to it. Like basically you're not going to be able to go into Penhurst and be like, we're going to demolish this building to put more bathrooms here, or put up like a parking. So it's a little, that's the only downside of it, I think, is like you got to work with that and preserve that component to it, which can be a problem just for the amount of people and that you're trying to bring in with your infrastructure. But generally, it helps them because it gives them more options.
Absolutely. Love it. So you gave some really great advice on just the haunt industry in general. As sort of the last stamp of this, do you have any words for anybody who doesn't really have all these resources and wants to get started? Where would you suggest getting started? Anything that you guys have from a resource perspective that can help?
I mean, someone who wants to start a haunted house,
Yeah.
don't do it. No. Only half joking, not really joking. So I used to teach, high school theater, and they had kids in there that are like, "I'm gonna be on Broadway," and you're just like, "Well, I mean, statistically speaking, probably not." And I think that's usually where I'm at. Is I'm like, if you can do like, first of all, like I said, they're terrible businesses. So if you need it for money, I would strongly encourage you to find literally anything else that you could do for money. Because where it becomes difficult is it sounds fun when you start it, but then what happens is you basically it's a thing that you think is an art or that you're passionate about, but then you're trying to make it into a business. And so like when that becomes a business, it can really change, how you feel about it. And so I think that's part, like, you don't want to destroy your love for it because you're trying to also make it make a living off of it. That's a hard line to walk. So they're not good businesses from the beginning. They're difficult, they're all these things. And so like I would say if you could do anything else and it's for a business, or um if you're determined, if you're like, I'll, like I told my students, like if you, if acting is like breathing to you, and if it hurts you to not act every single day, and that's all you think about, then maybe you'll make it. So if you feel like this for haunts, then, you might make it. And my suggestion, a lot of haunters, I think a lot of people think that they should just start their own thing, and I totally disagree with that. What you need to do is go work for somebody else first. And I mean, there's so much about haunt. I mean, it's a small business. It's literally a small business, and it's an art. And so not only do you need to know everything about running a small business, but you also need to know everything about the artistry of it. And these are not things that you learn in college, because we don't have college classes on how to use great stuff to create a prop, like, and think of all that you need. Literally, you need everything that you would need to run your own like independent theater, plus a theme park. Like, I mean, you need to understand acting, directing, script writing, character, lighting design, sound design, Q servers, DMX, all of that stuff. But then you also need HR. You need the ticketing systems. You need to know what to do about chargebacks. You need to know about security. I mean, there's like way too much. And so my recommendation is always like, go start working at a haunt, and if you can, move around. Start in whatever position they're hiring for, and then can you go up to actor trainer? Could you go back? Could you learn airbrushing on the side? Could you go, because the more knowledge you have about the different things, just like a general manager of something, the more knowledge you have, the easier it's going to be. Even if I'm not telling you to become an airbrush artist, I'm telling you to understand how to clean an airbrush machine and how to know safety, hygiene tips. And why? Because when you're hiring your own makeup artist and you're going to ask them, to clean a machine, or ask them if they, to make sure they're like, how are you going to know they're following the safety procedures of proper brush cleaning if you don't know what it looks like?
Yeah.
So you just got to think about these things. Like, you're going to need to just have a general awareness of all these topics. And I think the best way is to go and start working at a haunt. And haunters can be very gracious. Like, you can tell them that you're thinking that you're serious about this, and you're thinking and you want more responsibility, and you can work for them for a few years and move around and get that responsibility. You can volunteer to come in on build days and learn about the building and see how stuff is connected. Like, all that. There's so much to learn. You can do all that. That's my number one thing, because I think seeing it in real time, that's the best thing. It also gets you it's so much knowledge. Beyond that, um, there is the Haunted Attraction Association. And if you become a member of that, you get access to all of their resource library, which includes like HR manuals that you can download and customize, and like templates for all this stuff. It includes like insurance carriers and all this nonsense. But um, aside from that, we make content every year. We have a content library also of interviews with all these people. But um, I think it really, for something this big, I would start first by working at the haunt, be aware of the resources that are available to you. But honestly, then I would make your business plan and start working from that, and start going like, we call it in education, we call it just in time learning, which is fundamentally different than what you learn in college. Like, in college, when I learned calculus, I didn't use it. So now I don't know it.
Right.
But just in time learning is like the opposite. And that is like, basically, I would start with working at a haunt and start with your business plan. And then I would kind of start to work on your haunt. And as you realize you don't know a thing, then go look for the resources from what I mentioned to do that thing. So like, for example, you make your business plan, then you're like, okay, we're going to need to have all of our, the first thing you're going to need to submit documents to any fire marshal. And you're going to, if you need a loan, the bank's going to need a full business plan first. So you're going to need to learn how to do that. So then you can like go to YouTube and be like, how do I do my SWOT analysis, right? And then you learn that, and then you finish your business plan, right? And then when your business plan is done, well, then you're going to need to submit plans, to your fire marshal, and you're going to need to start actually designing the haunt. Okay, you need to know CAD for that or hire an architect.
Mhm.
So like so I mean you can do all these. You can start going and researching, is there can I use SketchUp or can I use AutoCAD or how to design or how do I design? Then that's gonna like naturally lead you into like the best design practices, which Leonard Pickle has a whole book on and he has all these stuff on. So then you'll do that and maybe you'll hire a designer, maybe you won't. I don't know. But you see what I mean. You get the idea. You I would start working at the haunt so you can see the day to day, and I would start with your business plan, and then you're going to start working through each thing and learning what you need to do that step, and then moving on, right? Maybe you're not going to become a haunt designer, but you need to know enough about what you need so that to even hire someone, and then you get a quote from them. Okay, this is how much it's going to cost to design my haunt. Okay, put that in the business plan in the budget. Okay, next item. Okay, I need a costume designer, or I need actors, or I need scenic fabrication, or animatronics, or I need lighting, and all these things. And you're gonna put all that in, and then you just keep going to the next item. Because there's just so much that I think that's the only way to do it realistically. If you're determined to do it, but doesn't it just sound more fun to get like a job that pays you money and just buy a ticket to a haunt and go hang out? I mean, that sounds more fun. I don't, I'm just saying.
Yeah, make a channel to report on it. Just go get to hang out. Yeah, why not?
Yeah. Like it's a lot. So maybe, just that's what I tell people. I'm like, maybe like, are you confusing liking to go to haunts with like wanting to be like a haunt owner? Because these are very different things. Yeah. And I'm always like, maybe just go to haunts. I mean, you hear a lot of people that like go travel the country and go to all these haunt tours and all this. And I'm like, yeah, like, but they still don't know how to actually do it. So that's why I always recommend going to haunts. Hey, go do your tour. But that's always why I recommend also working at the haunt because you got to know, like, especially if you have no experience in small business or no experience in any of this, you need to just kind of see what it looks like, and make the active effort to learn, right? Don't just like get hired as a scare actor and then just sit as this character, get hired as a character and then asked to move around, asked to become a trainer, so you get to see more. And in the meantime, be thinking about your business plan and how you're really going to make something that's going to succeed in the market that you want to be in.
Love it. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for all of your information, your stories. This has been really wonderful. So, yeah, thank you for your time.
Yeah, of course. I'm happy to be here and to have ranted. I think, yeah, it's like you're like one question, like 5 minutes later, and I'm like, whoops.
No, it's great information. It's awesome. So, yes, thank you.
Well, thank you all so much. And if anyone listening wants to follow our stuff, just hauntedattractionnetwork.com. I always recommend our weekly newsletter because that is where everything we cover from the week is like put in that newsletter. And then during haunt season, we put all our videos in there. But you can find us literally on any platform. But I would suggest our newsletter. Our podcast is on a separate website actually because it's like too much. It's 12, 1,300 episodes. So it's like on haunt.news is our podcast. And our main website is hauntedattractionnetwork.com. And our email newsletter is on there. But yeah, find us anywhere. And I'm gonna get that video of Transworld up eventually, guys. It's coming. It's everyone it's gonna get there. So check for YouTube.
That's perfect. Yes. Thank you for listening. Thank you for supporting. And for everybody here from Shivers, we will see you next week.